Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about the infliction of pain on another person, to talk about real pain faced by real people, and to talk about this body's dismissal of that pain, indeed willful infliction of even more pain on those experiencing gender dysphoria in our prisons. You see, gender dysphoria is a mental health diagnosis. And when left untreated, we know the results. They are always tragic and sometimes fatal. What other diagnosis will this body decide to deny treatment for simply because someone has been convicted? What's next? Is it depression, suicidal ideation, psychosis, anxiety? All of these are diagnoses that a person can have based on their testimony, behavior, and the evaluation of a mental health care professional. Are we going to decide that those aren't real either, despite the mountains of medical expertise that speak to the contrary? Gender dysphoria is a mental health diagnosis, one that polls indicate that very few Americans have ever personally experienced, but nonetheless, it's very real. It's as real as cancer, as real as kidney failure, as serious as a heart attack. Gender dysphoria is painful and it's real. Can you imagine living in pain every single day? And there's a low-cost pill that could ease your suffering. But because a bunch of people who've never felt your pain have decided that it's not real, you don't get to have that pill. When we ban HRT, that's what we are doing to a fellow human being. We are leaving them to suffer. Removing all of the tools for treating that pain is fundamentally cruel. Deciding that one mental health diagnosis is not as real as the others, dismissing the pain of another's lived experience, it's wrong and it's cruel. When a person who is incarcerated has a diagnosis, we, the taxpayers, pay for their treatment. Gonorrhea, chlamydia, HIV, hepatitis, lymphoma, high blood pressure, we pay for it. Depression, anxiety, anorexia, psychosis, we pay for it. Cancer treatments that require medications, covered. Surgical intervention needed, covered. Diabetes that requires a daily medications, we got you. An amputation is needed, got you, it's covered. Broke your leg while committing a crime, no problem. We've got a splint and crutches for you. Nicked yourself while shanking somebody else. Well, we've got taxpayer-paid stitches waiting just for you. Develop glaucoma, need dialysis, we, the taxpayers, cover it. And why do we cover it for people who are incarcerated? Why? Because we are better than the criminal who shows no regard for human suffering. We cover it because we have a moral obligation to avoid inflicting pain on another human being, regardless of a crime that they've committed. We pay for medical care for people in prison because we have a constitutional duty to avoid cruel and unusual punishment. SB 185 is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional because it denies health care to those who are in custody. We are denying them care when we know that they have something that is very painful and yet very treatable. To deny this care is willful disregard of our duty to provide medicine and healing for those in prison who need it. As a society, we've decided that when someone willfully causes another pain, and shows no regard for human suffering, doing so is a criminal act. Yet when lawmakers withhold treatment for those with certain medical health diagnoses, when we disregard their suffering and cause immeasurable pain, well, they just call that Monday. But I want to take a step back for a moment. I want to take a step away from the issue of this General Assembly willfully choosing to inflict more pain on a minority population and turn to the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. You see, the Eighth Amendment states that excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. The Eighth Amendment doesn't differentiate between separate classes or categories for those in our carceral system. It doesn't differentiate between those that the General Assembly deems normal and worthy and those that the body doesn't understand. The Eighth Amendment applies to every person in our carceral system. And how do we define cruel and unusual punishment? Well, the Supreme Court defines cruel and unusual punishment as punishments that are arbitrary, unnecessary, overly painful, humiliating, or degrading to human dignity. In a 2015 case, Diamond versus Owens, which sought to expose the harm endured by a transgender woman denied care for gender dysphoria, the Department of Justice issued a clear directive for all state prisons. The directive said that prisons must continue hormone regimens that people came in needing at the time of incarceration. Bringing it a little closer to home, this body's disregard for the numerous lawsuits that have been filed in our state regarding anti-trans policies is just staggering. It's staggering that Georgia taxpayers have paid over $4 million in transgender discrimination cases since 2015. It's staggering that out of the 19 cases brought against the state regarding discrimination of transgender children and transgender people, the state has won 0 cases. The taxpayer money spent on legal action far outweighs the funds we could have directed to the medical care for those in our prisons. Yet, despite these staggering facts, the lawsuits, the directive from the Department of Justice, despite the unconstitutionality of SB 185, despite the pain that this bill inflicts on a small population with a treatable mental health diagnosis, here we are. Here we are again. But I want to be clear, I refuse to be silent. I refuse to accept an unconstitutional, cruel, and unnecessary piece of legislation that is going to be the norm here. I will not sit silently by and watch a group of Georgia citizens be crushed and beaten down by this body yet again. And before I take my seat, I want to address the elephant in the room. I know good and well that public polling does not support gender-affirming care for people who are incarcerated. But I am keenly aware of our history, a history in which public opinion has often not been on the right side of justice, a history in which public polling has often sided with the majority and further isolated and forsaken the minority. I know this is not politically popular, but I stand here today urging my colleagues to vote no on this bill, to vote no as a sign of your commitment to humanity. Vote no for dignity. Colleagues, I beg you, do not let public polling persuade you to do something that you know in your heart is fundamentally unconstitutional, and quite frankly, it's downright immoral. With that, I yield the well.